Welcome to the What is Smart podcast. We dive deep into the ever-evolving world of intelligence, learning, and success. Join us as we engage with leading educators, psychologists, technologists, and thinkers, unraveling insights and challenging old notions. From EQ to creativity, from tech savviness to social awareness, What is Smart is your guide to understanding intelligence in the 21st century. Let's change education together.
What's up, everybody? It's Garrett here for What is Smart. What is Smart is brought to you by the Gardens Foundation. We are out there in the trenches, the barbed wire, we're the Rebel Alliance, if you will, going after the education system, actually trying to inform change on the ground level. And guys, that costs money. Unfortunately, it does. And I know what you're thinking, Garrett, are you going to hit me up for money again? The answer is a little bit. Yes, please visit www.thegardensfoundation.org. You can find our merch. We have What is Smart sweatshirts. We have What is Smart t-shirts. All of the proceeds go directly to our first project, Global Pathways with Johns Hopkins University. You want to be a part of it, and that's a way you can. We put great content, this podcast, all on our page. You can check it out there. And speaking of great content, my friends, this is called a segue in stand-up comedy. We have an amazing guest. We have another member of the Teach Better team. These folks are infiltrating my life. I feel like they're peeking over windows like, Garrett, pick me. But we really have a great team in the background finding humans like our next guest. And that being said, today we have Joshua Stamper. Joshua is the author of Aspire to Lead. He's a podcaster just like myself. He's a leadership coach, an education presenter, and podcast network manager for the Teach Better team. Joshua, thank you so much for joining us on What is Smart today.
Man, Garrett, I absolutely love the podcast, but even more so love what you're doing with the Gardens Foundation. So thank you so much for having me on today.
The pleasure is all mine when it comes to you. And let's just dive right into it as we always do. One of the things that I saw, Josh, well, first of all, let's start with, if you could give our listeners and viewers a little bit of, I'd like to cover an origin story of how you got into education and why you're so passionate in the work that you do now.
Yeah, it was a crazy time. Honestly, I started off as a graphic designer, not to go too far back, but did that for like 3 years. And then the economy just crashed. It was during the recession. My job got dissolved. And I was newly married. We just had our daughter, and I had to drive home and say, hey, guess what? I don't have a job anymore, and we'll be unemployed in 2 weeks. So I sat down at the table. Yeah, surprise, right? That's what every new wife and child wants to hear. So we sat down and just kind of laid it out. And my wife, being as wise as she is, Leslie, was just like, hey, what do you love? What do you want to do? Because she knew I was passionate about art. But she also knew there were other things that I loved in life. And so I kind of sat down and mapped it out of, I love athletics, I love soccer, and I love, trying to create and present knowledge to other people and really with youth, some of the things that I was doing. So she was like, well, that sounds like a teacher. So what if you went back to school and started that as a career? And that's exactly what I did. And so, about 18 months later, I'm in the classroom, and eventually led to us moving to Texas as our teacher and coach, and did that for 6 years. So when I started coaching, it wasn't right away. I wanted to really hone in on my craft as a teacher because I was brand new. I wanted to know what I was doing. So it was about year 3 that I started coaching and doing football, basketball, and track. And I started to get these opportunities to help students beyond my classroom. And my assistant principal at the time, I was honestly attacked in the staff room getting a cup of coffee one morning. And I say that because I was barely awake. I'm not a morning person. So I'm getting my cup of coffee, and he came out of nowhere asking, hey, have you thought about not only leadership, but being a principal someday? And I'll be honest, Garrett, I laughed at him. I straight up in his face laughed and was like, dude, what are you talking about? I just want to get coffee. Like, I'm a new teacher. I feel a little comfortable now in the classroom. I'm just starting to coach. I'm starting to learn that role now. I have no desire at this point to be a leader of many on a campus. And he's like, just think about it. I really feel like you're making a giant impact. And he really gave very specific examples of how I was impacting beyond the four walls of my classroom. And so I went home again, brought it to Leslie and was like, hey, what do you think? She was like, I can totally see it. Like, I'm so glad he had that conversation. And then 2 months later, Garrett, I was in a program for my master's in educational leadership. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it was crazy. It took a couple years of getting that experience and failing, and that's really what my book's about, of really showing what's behind the scenes of being a teacher leader, trying to move up into the role that I really wanted, I dreamed of, and was so passionate about. I really was dedicated of finding every opportunity I could to learn and to grow, to be able to get into that next position. And so thankfully was an assistant principal for 10 years. During that time,
Wow.
I was speaking, I wrote the book, I was podcasting, I was doing a lot of other things, and built a relationship with the phenomenal Teach Better team. And then this about a year ago, I was presented an opportunity to work with them, and so transitioned, started as the podcast manager, and now I'm the director of innovation for the Teach Better team. And so absolutely
Oh,
love my
very cool.
job. Yeah, I love working with teachers and leaders all over this country. But yeah, just it was kind of a wild ride. But all that being said, is I absolutely am. I loved my time at leadership at the campus level and supporting so many people during that time.
That's amazing. And thank you for the context for our listeners and viewers. I think one of the things I heard there was, you going back to school, you kind of going through school, bouncing around, which is the typical path for most learners now, which also kind of shows, and this is my point, do you see, or did it help you to see the flaws within the system in going through the system, not just through your own K through 12 experience, but then on into college and then later into getting, I would imagine, a master's or some kind of
Mhm.
educational leadership. Okay, great. And did you see somewhat? I guess this is a better question. One, did you see or did it help you to see the faults in the path? And then two, did it inspire you to then, like you said, innovate in the space to help to create something different to avoid this for other people?
Oh, 100%. The main reason that I went back to become a teacher wasn't because I loved school. That was quite the opposite. I wanted
Right.
to be a change. I want to be a change agent. I wanted to push the boundaries of what was going on because I had such a miserable time. And I say that full context. I hated school. I didn't see the point in it. I knew and fought with my teachers and parents about not needing most of the content that was being presented to me and that I wouldn't use it in life. And I hate to say it, but I was right, Garrett. There was so much stuff that I don't use. And,
Right.
I had phenomenal teachers that, built wonderful relationships with me, and I would get an A in those classes because I could see as a human being that they were invested in my future as a person, not about the content, right? If I had a teacher that was only pushing, notes and quizzes and tests down my throat, and things that I knew wasn't going to be relatable for me as an adult, I did not do well. I would get D's, I would get C's, I would pass, but barely pass because I just did the minimum because I knew that they didn't really care about me as an individual. So when I was going in and being a teacher, and especially a coach too, because coaches were a huge influence in my life, I would not be talking to you today without so many wonderful gentlemen that's really spoke to me about leadership and about being a good human being in addition to playing soccer, that I wanted to be that same person. I wanted to be the art teacher that poured into me, that saw more in myself than I saw in myself, in my own life, and really pushed me to be better. And then of course those coaches. So when I wanted to go back to school and become a teacher, I was saying, okay, what were the greatest influences in my life beyond my family? It was my art teacher, which I became an art teacher, and my coaches, which I became
Awesome.
coaches. And then just trying to then go beyond just the teaching of the curriculum of, okay, I also want to mentor kids and I want to advocate for them. I want to, change my classroom so that it's a creative space and one that I'm teaching life lessons, not just about the content, because that's important. Yes, I understand that, we have state standards and things that we have to do. But at the same point, I wanted to go above and beyond that as far as looking at how am I going to address future ready skills that are going to then present that for them to be successful moving forward.
Awesome. And I would even say, in the coaching experience, because you in talking defined coaching and teaching almost in separate categories, right? And I think great education and future preparedness is leaning far more towards almost how you would, and I don't want to define it for you, but in that coaching sense of soft skills, of teaching someone to have grit, someone to learn to fail forward. How much of that do you see in your everyday practice now? Because are you no, you moved full time to Teach Better, correct? You're no longer. That's amazing.
No longer,
but even prior to that, how much of the shift towards that did you start to make, even in your assistant principal position, or how much of the people around you did you empower with that so that it trickled down? I'd love to hear how your exploration into this space drove innovation in even the school that you were working at.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of being in multiple campuses in multiple districts, and that was something that day one that I landed on that campus, I was pounding the table for, because I dislike traditional ways of doing things. And so I'll give you an example, Garrett. I got up in front of our staff and I talked about the fact that we are building our students for a reality that we don't know exists. So for instance, at that time, there were hundreds and of drone pilot positions available. Well, myself growing up, I didn't know what a drone was. I didn't know what a drone pilot was. I didn't know the skills that were needed to become a drone pilot. However, it's a very lucrative position that would pay very well for our students. So what skills are we presenting to our students to be able to then go and get a job that I have no clue what it does, what it's meant to be for, and don't even know the definition of that technology. Now, today we're talking about AI and, looking at all of the additional items that are available to our students. And I mean, it's mind-boggling to know that there's going to be a future of positions that we don't know the technology, we don't know what its name and need is, and what are the skills that are going to be possessed by our students for those jobs. And so after that, it was funny because I actually had a staff member follow me out of the staff meeting to my office, and I respect him greatly. And he shut the door and was like, I just want you to know that the staff thinks that what you just said is BS. And I'm putting abbreviations to that. But he said, you spoke so passionately that they are going to follow what you say based on that passion, not because of the words that you're speaking. And I think that was really evident because I didn't really have a relationship with that staff at that time. I was speaking off the cuff and something that I knew was a need for the campus, for the district, but it wasn't that I had a real strong relationship with them. They just knew me as a talking head at that point. But due to the way that I was speaking and how passionate I was with the content that I was providing, I think that started to make a shift to say, okay, well, I do need to at least think about this in a greater scale, because I mean, this is a direction that our IMAT's going to go. And then also, I think based on how he got up in front of everyone and spoke, that I need to maybe assess this a little bit more. And we did. We started making, and it was a long shift. It took years, especially like with our assessment, of really getting at the idea that a quiz and a test is not the only way to assess a student's mastery of content, right? So, what are some other ways of doing that? And then also, how are we providing that content to our students? And then also you talk about the SEL and the future ready skills component. Are we looking beyond the content to make sure that we're, you had already talked about it, right? The grit and the empathy and those components, those pieces that are so vital to our students. So how are we able to do that within the lesson, and not to take away from the content, but just these small snippets that we can throw in that maybe take 30 seconds to 2 minutes, that are invaluable for our students to be able to learn how to be good humans beyond just understanding the content.
And I think it's so challenging now because, yes, there are great people like you, formerly in classrooms doing amazing things like this. A lot of times I see even SEL practices in schools being delivered in a way that is very similar to the problem, right? Of let's have an assembly. Let's have a talking head that isn't super inspirational, get up and yell at kids and tell them a word like grit or honesty or collaboration or whatever. But we know, especially in the research we're doing and the people we're talking to, that educators have to embody that for themselves. The best, in my opinion, SEL program is a program that isn't mentioned to the learners, only mentioned to the teachers. that they implement these practices on a daily basis. It's one of the reasons, like even in my business, we have a culture called surprise and delight, where each staff member is required to do 2 random acts of kindness per week, right?
Oh,
and
awesome.
so we want to inspire kids to do something similar. And we know that it's never going to be translated, let's say, immediately, but our hope is the long term, right? So thinking about SEL and talking about what I read into, which is that you are trained in trauma-informed practices when it comes to education and coaching, I would imagine too. You know, one of the things we see a lot when thinking about future learning is that we have to connect with our learners. We have to engage them. And I truly feel that the connection piece there is a sense of empathy and compassion. So talk to me a little bit about some of the tools or maybe best practices when it comes to trauma-informed teaching, coaching, to help to start building what I look at as trust. Right. We look at it in the early education space as like pairing with the learner. You want to make sure that you establish a trusting bond. What are the ways that you've learned to do that?
Oh my goodness. So I'm going to tell you a story of how we implemented, because it's kind of a little bit different. It's a grassroots movement versus a top-down initiative, right? So I've had a lot of top-down initiatives fall flat on its face, fail miserably. So with this, my wife and I became foster parents and did that for 12 years.
Awesome.
And adopted 4 beautiful children through that process. And so that's where the training came in with TCU and Professor Purvis with the Trust Space initiative that she's been running and the research. So that's where it came. And I saw the intersection between the behaviors that they were talking about and how they were responding to those, which was so different than what the school was doing, right? I was suspending kids left and right for sometimes minor infractions. And you talk about learning loss. I mean, it was thousands, Garrett, thousands of hours that were lost because students were either sitting in a room with a ISS teacher or going and being sent home. And then in addition to that, when they were being sent home, there was no one there to collect the child, right? So they were running the neighborhoods and getting into more trouble. And then it was like this cycle of just, drama and just insanity that was going out in the community then was being brought back to the campus when they were allowed to come back to learn. And so I was really sick of that. I felt defeated. I almost stepped away from administration altogether because I felt like I wasn't making a need. Yeah, man. It was just like the data was showing that things were getting worse. They weren't getting better. And then at my disposal, I had detentions, ISS and OSS, and that was the only thing in my tool belt. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, we can't continue this process. So going through that trauma-informed and responsive, training changed my trajectory as an administrator completely. And so I went back to my admin team and I was like, look, we gotta start implementing some of these things, because the trauma that they're showing as far as foster kids, we're seeing with our own students here in this building. And there's the data saying that 70% of our kids are going through at least one form of trauma. And I can assure you that most of them have gone through 3, 4, 5, maybe more, based on the behaviors that we're seeing. And so what are we doing as a campus to provide the resources necessary to really get at the bottom of the issue? Because that's what we're doing. We're essentially putting our finger in a dam and it's breaking, right? So what are we doing to make sure that we're sealing all of it up? And so that's when the work came in, and we built what was called a relationship action team. Unfortunately, that's an acronym that spells RATS, and so we were called the RATS group. But it started with like
whatever,
whatever works. So it was kind of fun. But we had a collection of people, right? So we had teachers, we had counselors, admin, whatnot, of various people that were like-minded and saying, "Hey, we see a need, we need to make a change." And so the group was collective and had 3 core principles. One, you had to be open-minded. When you were coming into the group, you had to put all of your biases, all your experiences at the door, come in, and even if it sounds crazy, at least be open-minded to say, I will try it and implement it in my classroom or in the school. Second piece was that you needed to try at least, everything that was presented, right? So if someone brought something to the table, that you would try it out and be okay if it failed, because how would we know if it worked or not, right? If it worked, great, implement it moving forward. If it didn't, then obviously it's not something that's for your classroom. The last thing was that if something worked and it worked well, that you would share it with a colleague, a neighbor, and invite them to be a part of the action team, right? The relationship action team. And so what happened was not only are we learning, but we're also sharing that out, because it's one thing for administrators to say, hey, you gotta do this because it's best for kids, right? It's another just for a peer to come to another peer and say, hey, I've
Love
implemented
that.
this, I tried it, it worked. I think you should look into it also. And we started to see other people not only adopting these practices, but then also coming and joining the relationship action team. And by the end of the school year, we had almost half of our staff a part of this team, which was huge as far as implementation. Because I will share this, we had our Region 10 group come out and they did a meeting with us as far as like a little activity, right? It was, hey, if you have ever been sent to the principal's office, or if you've never been sent to the principal's office, go to the lower level of our cafetorium. And 98% of our staff, Garrett, went down and stood there. Then they said, if you've been to the
Wow.
principal's office once, go to the next level. Very few went there. If you've been sent twice, go to the next level. Very few went there. And then if you've been sent 3 or more times, go to the top level. So myself and a few people went to the top level, right? So what does that say as far as the activity? Well, majority of our staff had never gotten in trouble with the principal, had never been suspended, had a enjoyable educational experience, and which was what led them into teaching, right? So
Right.
when a student is being maybe defiant, maybe they're off task, maybe they don't want to be at school at all. Well, those teachers are disconnected because their own experiences were not the same as the student that they're interacting with, right? So that's where it was like, okay, there's a light bulb moment of there's a need here, there's a disconnect, right? So that's when we started to look into the training. So when we did the relationship action team, those folks are getting training, but now we got to go school wide. So year 2 was, okay, this is now we've got at least half the staff on board. We're almost at the majority to tilt that wheel, if you will. Then let's make it so it's all through the campus. So then we started to implement things and just making it a standard of here's our relationship inventory checklist. Are you going to the door to say hi to every student? And not that you have to do like on TikTok and have a special handshake with every student, although that would be great.
Right.
But at the same time, what's your touch points, right? Are you saying their name correctly? Are you, having contact in a healthy way, right? A high five, a fist bump, a side hug, right? Because as humans, we want to make connections. So how are we making those connections with our students? The other thing is we did classroom check-ins in the morning, right? Some people did it with numbers, some did it with colors, some did it with funny memes as far as trying to identify what's going on in the lives of our students. Because what would happen is like, a kid would come in, hoodie on top of his head, looking down, angry, and then sits down and expects, we expect them to learn something right away at 8:30 in the morning. And then what's going on in the background is, they didn't get any sleep because their parents were up all night fighting, throwing stuff at each other, and police were at their house, and, it was just chaotic. And then, we expect them to be on their best behavior and to learn right away. Well, these check-ins in the morning allowed us an opportunity for the student to have a way to provide that communication to our teachers to understand, like, hey, I'm a 2 today, which is terrible. I'm not a 10, right? So, a student to the right is a 9, a student to the left is a 2. Well, obviously, I'm going to, as a teacher, now I know I have this information. I'm going to treat the 2 a little bit different, actually, probably a lot different than the 9, because the 9's having a great day, right? They're on point, they're ready to learn. Where the 2 had probably something terrible going on in their life, and they're not at that point. So, I'm going to communicate and expect different things from that person. Well, I wouldn't know that unless I asked, right? So, we have a system that's put in place to have an opportunity that's a low risk for the student, right? I don't have to announce it to the entire world that I'm having a crappy
Right.
day and that I had trauma going on in my life, right? So, but then also give us an opportunity to get them the resource they need, right? So they could communicate maybe in a Google form to say, hey, I want to see a counselor right now. Maybe I need to go to the nurse and take a nap. Maybe I didn't eat for several days and I need food because I'm starving, right? So we had those opportunities for students to be able to communicate their needs to us, because if those basic needs aren't met, how are we supposed to get them to learn anything? So, I always consistently said, like, to
Ugh.
get brain knowledge to the brain, we got to go to the heart. And so what are some practices that we can put down to, again, build, like you said, building a trusting relationship between the teacher and the student, because the teachers are the ones, having these touch points with our kids more so than anyone else. I don't know that as an administrator because I'm not with them all the time. So what are our teachers doing to figure out what are the needs of our students so that they can be not only the best person, but then also be able to learn and master the content?
Well, and what's interesting there is that I think a lot of the game-changing education that's happening in the classroom, this connection we're speaking about, is from trauma-informed educators, or more so trauma-experienced, let's say.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't see a lot of innovators, and in fact, that's a fascinating project to look into. Is like how many educators across the country have experienced trauma, and then ultimately
Hmm.
what are their results when it comes to their learners? Because what I was thinking is it only takes that little moment. A lot of these kids that are coming to school every day, I was one of them as a kid, like very affected by trauma, is quietly begging for
Yep.
someone to check in with them more so than anyone else. If things are okay at home and maybe you're upset that, dad gave me 5 extra minutes of, chore time, or I lose some screen time or whatever, that's
Right.
one thing. But if you're coming hungry after not eating for 4 or 5 days, and expected to compete against all of these other kids, it's just, and a lot of times, unfortunately, Josh, is that these kids do go under the radar, right?
Yeah.
This does happen. So that's even why it's more important that we be proactive as educators to reach out and connect, even if you get shade, even if you get made of fun of. One of the things for me is with my educators in the classroom, we have a motto: drop the ego, trust the child. You
Yeah.
know, take the hit. These are kids, man. They're just trying to learn, and all we have over them is not more respect deserved, it's wisdom, and it's
Yep.
wisdom through time. And I feel a responsibility, like any good educator would, to share that wisdom. And that is through the barrier of seeing a child for what they really are in their heart. And the only way you can do that, I love the fact that you were checking in mindfully, intentionally with every kid. And I'm sure half the time it's, yeah, whatever, go sit down. But it's the
Mhm.
one time where the kid fills out the Google form, connects,
Yep.
says, I'm on the fence with why I should be living right now, that things
Yep.
turn very serious, and then help can be had, through knowing we can help so much. So I think the work
Hmm.
that you're doing, and even your work as an assistant principal, was pushing the needle forward in a lot of ways, because it takes someone like you. Everyone thinking about, educators in the class that really thrive in the current model, well, they don't fully understand what that model turns into, or they're willing to take a back seat to continue. Because the one thing I was thinking in my head when you were talking was trauma echoes, right?
Yeah.
So trauma when it comes to educators teaching, trauma when it comes to the learners in the classroom. The more that we continue this same disconnected cycle, the more we're going to have the cycle. So, talking to that, of course, what do you think, Josh, in your work now, developing programming, helping other educators, what do you think is, if you could give one, like, I don't want to say soapbox moment, because that Ray asked me for one of those, but one like helpful tool that you could give educators now that are in classrooms K through 12, that are seeking to connect
Hmm.
with their learners a little bit more, but maybe they're not confident enough. Maybe they're scared to reach out in a meaningful, more emotionally connected way. What would you tell that teacher or teachers? Because they're out there.
Oh, for sure. And I would say don't wait for a campus initiative to do the work that needs to be done, right?
Amen.
If you know that there's a need in your classroom, then that's where you need to step up as a leader in your own space and do what needs to be done, right? And it's nothing, it doesn't have to be grand, right? We don't, what I've already said is nothing that's going to take a lot of effort and time, right? Going and meeting people at the door. Most teachers do that. It's just the consistency that is lacking there, right? It's not an everyday thing because we get into the rat race of the job. And I was guilty of this as a teacher myself. I knew it was important to be at the door and to greet people, right? But I also knew that there were probably 100 emails sitting in my inbox that I could be addressing also. Or, maybe I forgot to make copies, or maybe I was, didn't have the presentation up and I wanted to make sure I had all those things. Well, those things are important, but are they the most important thing? No, right? Then we also talked about like we did relationship agreements with our classes. That's allowing the students to have ownership of what that relationship looks like from peer to peer, peer to teacher, and teacher to peer. It doesn't take much time, but as far as a tool and how it allows the students to feel ownership, and for those who have gone through trauma, they don't have ownership in their life, right? And then if you look at the school model, most of the time the students are hearing, no, no, sit down, shut up, no, it's like this constant negative reinforcement of don't do this. Yeah, don't do this, don't do this. And so having an opportunity to have a voice of what should happen is super powerful. And then we also did like relationship circles where it was allowing the student to have a voice and have the captivation of the entire classroom. So they're learning skills of communication, but then also how to listen. Like how many opportunities do we present that to our students? That's a key skill that would be wonderful for them to as an adult. And it's nothing that has to be long period of time. These are, like I said, 30 seconds to 2 minutes of opportunities for students to share what's their favorite fast food fries, right? Something that's low level. It doesn't require a lot, but kids love to talk about themselves, especially middle school students, right? So giving them that forum, but then also it allows them to make connections with other people, right? In addition to the teacher. And so like as an admin, one of my main goals was like, what is the one trusting adult that every kid has, right? So we would do a survey to our entire student body. And it was always so disheartening to see like that 10 to 15% of people, of kids that said, I don't have a trusted adult in this building. Well, that needs to change because, the kids that are saying that are probably the toughest ones to make a relationship with. So what are we doing in the classroom to make sure that we're building this healthy relationship for them when they're in a time of need to speak up and share something with you? I can think of so many instances where a kid would tell me something just insane that happened to them as an individual. It was heartbreaking. And the first thing I would say was, who is the trusted adult in this building? I want to bring them into this office now because I know it's not me, right? Because a lot of times it was someone that I had a relationship with, that I had a couple interactions with, but it wasn't the same level. And so I would get that teacher. I would put another human being in that classroom because what was needed was them to be in the office with me to work through whatever was grand going on, in addition to find the resources necessary for that kid. But I would put that data up on the screen for my staff and say, hey, look, this amount of students do not have a trusted adult. I don't know who they are, but we need to do everything humanly possible to make sure that we are, providing that to them. And then also just letting them know, like, hey, this percentages of our students are homeless. Like, because a lot of times our staff does not have the data that we do as administrators to know the student body and what's going on. And so not to, share, important information or information that shouldn't be shared with our staff, but, making sure that they understand, like, the kids that we see in our hallways may not look homeless, but they are, right? They don't know where they're going to sleep tonight. And, there's this amount of students that have single homes where the parent is working 3 jobs and they don't see their kids, except for maybe once a week, so like just providing opportunities for the staff to understand there's a lot going on in our students' lives. And it's not that they have this perfect environment that they're going home to every single day. They're going through some crazy stuff. And we need to have some empathy as an adult to be able to, create an environment that they feel safe in, that they feel ownership in, they feel like they have a trusted adult. And then, when those things happen, that's when the learning then can proceed.
And part of, gosh, very well said. And part of that is because there's so much stigma, because we have echo chambers, because we have social media, because we have all of these things, kids are very focused on, how they appear to the world, what's their digital, environment, how are they projecting themselves to the world? It's almost like if we could get to a place, right, and this may be way lofty dreaming, where that stigma isn't there, I'd imagine that those trials and tribulations, and you know what, not only could be celebrated in school, but are celebrated later on in life in current. I mean, when you look at, some hip hop artist, part of the understanding of a hip hop artist is their story. And a lot of times, if, someone like Eminem or Biggie or very infrequently are they coming from like super rich backgrounds with everything going well. We do celebrate this path. It's this like very small window
where everybody, even before social media, was hyper focused on appearance and all of that. And now it's even more magnified. It's that stigma that I think too helps to squash kids and helps to kind of keep them down, because if they're quiet to their educators, they're quiet to their parents, or their parents aren't around, or they don't have parents, who else is going to pick up on the nuance of being able to, say that, hey, Billy's having a rough day. I dream, especially at the Gardens Foundation, that we get to a place where we can celebrate failure.
Yes.
We can celebrate our journeys and how different and how weird each one of our journeys are. I think it would be such a wonderful, wonderful way of putting, kids into the world. And pivoting from that, we ask everybody on this show, Josh, and it's a big question, and there's no right or wrong answer. I'm fascinated with people's answers around this, but we ask this question as we wrap up. We always like to think of a car ride home, 30 to 45 minutes. What do you think SMART is, Josh?
Oh, goodness. I think SMART, as far as the definition or term, has really little to do with academics at all.
Amen.
I think it's more about the process than the outcome. I think SMART is understanding that it can be done in a multitude of ways. I am in the position I am not because of my successes, but because of the battles and the scars and the trials that I had to experience to get to where I am. And that fortitude of dusting myself off and knowing that I'm not perfect. I don't deserve anything, but I'm going to work hard to get to where I want to be. And, if I'm looking at my academic career, K through 12, I know my teachers did not think I was smart, and then definitely didn't think I was going to be successful in life. And I say that because they straight up told me. Some would say, you have potential, you're not living up to your potential. But I think so many times we think of SMART as academic, and I push on that so much more because, especially if you're looking at, 2030 and the skills that are needed for those, future ready skills to be successful, I'm sorry, but academic SMART is not on there. It's not, and thankfully, I did have creativity, in my skill set. I did have perseverance, and I had a fire inside of me that I wanted to prove people wrong. And I do think that was instilled with my mother specifically, and like I said, my art teacher and my coaches. But I don't think I'm here today talking with you or doing all of the many things that you listed due to the content that I learned or because I did well on a test or a quiz.
God, man, if we could clip every bit of that and just put it out into the world, because you're absolutely, in my opinion, and again, there's many opinions across the world, you're spot on. It's now to the point where if you really understand the educational outcomes, the education system, and has been kind of at this point of just absolute frustration by educators like us that are saying, you're going out of school given skills and tools that become very quickly irrelevant. And, I always think, like, you wrote a book, Aspire to Lead. I love the fact that I'm sure you never thought you'd write a book. You know what I mean? And I'm sure that the only way that you learned to write a book was you wrote a book. So just in that, right? Innovative people, people that express themselves through art, expression in general, most of the time are just either learning foundational skills or not. Like in our experience, I would imagine, like, I didn't walk out of high school really. I have my report card framed on my wall. I graduated high school with a 1.8, which you
I was not too far away from that.
Yeah, no, you can do that. I always tell people, like, that was real. It came down to a test in Miss Sipes' class, a teacher that hated me, an English teacher. Mm-hmm. And like redemption somehow came into my life when the final test was literally questions drawn out of a hat, and it could be really hard or really easy. And I got Who Wrote Hamlet, and I looked up at my teacher and she was devastated. And that's the moment I knew, like, this is super toxic.
This is super not okay. The fact that like you're upset that I'm graduating when that should be your goal, like what are we doing here? So I think you're spot on. I think as long as you're doing the work you're doing out there with the Teach Better team, and the reason why I love you guys over there is that you're actually providing value, right? Like it's not just heady conversations and hanging out around educators. It's here's tools, here's ways in which, I mean, you've already given our listeners and viewers some tools they can use tomorrow in their classrooms, some ideas that they can use tomorrow. So keep doing the work that you're doing. Josh, where can they find, we were talking offline about your newest book. I don't know if that's an announcement.
Yeah, it is.
And if not, yeah, awesome. So would love to kind of tell our viewers and listeners where they can find all of your stuff, especially your new book. If you could talk a little bit about that and what you're doing there.
Yeah, I would love to. So joshstamper.com, I mean, that's a hub for everything. So
super easy.
You
we'll
can
put
find,
it right here.
Yeah, perfect. So, as far as the new book, I have a phenomenal co-author, Charlie Peck, who has written a book herself before on school mental health and just the need there. And then she is a prior social worker. And then I've got obviously my admin background. And so just the blend of the two worlds and viewpoints of how to kind of, work through this trauma-informed, trauma-responsive work and how we've implemented it in our schools, in our districts, and really trying to lay it out so that it's easy for folks. Because it's one thing to know that the problem exists. There's another to understand it, but then it's also, what are we going to do about it, right? We shouldn't just stop at understanding and knowing that there's a problem. We need to go into these schools, and even if we're having a tough time with resources or money or, people, and like we need to do something. So trying to find practical ways that, similar to what we talked about today, the title is The Language of Behavior, right? So using behavior as a code. So they're telling us something. What are they telling us? And so a lot of times, I know for myself going into teaching, I wasn't really, presented with information about student behavior and classroom management. It was something that I had to figure out myself. And the reason I was having such a tough first year, which this is talking with so many educators, this is very evident throughout the country, is that first year is so difficult because we're trying to figure out how to manage our students and the behaviors that exist. And so we're trying to outline and kind of give a guide for teachers, for counselors, for, administrators, as far as ways that they can really look at the behavior, identify what they're trying to tell us, and then of course putting pieces in place in that environment for kids to feel safe and be successful. So very similar to what we talked about today. It's something that Charlie and I both present on, but it's also something that we feel extremely passionate about and wanting to have a resource in addition to all the things that we talk about. So joshstamper.com, you'll get definitely more information there. Social media, it's super easy. It's Joshua_Stamper. So on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and Instagram, those are my handles. So love to connect. And then of course, if you have any questions or need support, I'm always there for you.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Josh, for doing the show today. We really appreciate your insight, your perspective, your view on what you think SMART is, but more so, what I love, and again, would love to kind of continue the conversation down the road, is how we can leverage the understanding of even subconscious behaviors that we can pick up on to help lean into kids. There's so many kids out there that need help, that could be pushed forward, like myself, in a way that, is would avoid a lot less struggle for these guys. I think there's, everyone, like you said, so many percentage of kiddos that have trauma in their lives. I think it's just, we have to be there as educators. We have to step up and understand what that role means and really lean into exactly what Josh is and his work is talking about, which is to establish deeper connections and be intentional. So thank you for joining us here on the What is Smart podcast. We'll continue to provide amazing guests just like Josh. We'll see you on the next time. And don't forget, you can be a part of the change of education at a micro level in your classroom. No matter what anyone else says, you can inform change in your classroom. Start there. Have a great day, and we'll see you very soon.